I caught my dad cheating with my aunt, and that's when I found out it had been going on for years. I never thought the worst betrayal of my life would come from two people I loved the most, until one afternoon, I opened the wrong door and saw everything. You never think it'll be your family. We grew up with Sunday barbecues and fake smiles stretched tight across wine-soaked evenings. My dad, the so-called provider, protector, was the kind of man who filled a room with his voice, his opinions, and when he got angry, with his silence. He wasn't cruel, but he had that old-school edge. What he said was final. The kind of father who made you feel like you owed him something just for existing. My mom adored him. At least she used to. My sister, Leah, avoided conflict like it was a contagious disease. And me? I was the quiet one, the observer. I stayed out of his way, did well in school, and kept to myself. Then there was Aunt Denise, my mom's younger sister. She was the cool aunt. Witty, wild, unfiltered. She'd been divorced twice and wore it like a badge of honor. When she'd visit, she brought chaos into the house, the kind that felt exciting when you were a kid. But now that I'm older, I can say this. There was always something off between her and my dad. At first, I thought I was imagining it. The way her hand lingered a second too long on his shoulder when she laughed. How his voice got just a little softer when he said her name. They always claimed it was all jokes, that they were just close, like siblings-in-law should be. But I noticed everything. The first real crack came last summer. We were at the lake house, a place that had always felt like a sacred family retreat. But that weekend was different. Mom had to stay behind due to a work emergency, and Denise conveniently decided to drop by uninvited. I was supposed to go out with friends, but I had food poisoning. I stayed behind. That's when I saw it. A moment I can't erase if I tried. I was upstairs, coming down to grab water, when I saw them through the kitchen window. My dad and Denise were out by the grill. Too close. Her hand was on his chest, and his mouth. God, his mouth was right against her ear. Whispering. Smiling. Then she kissed him. Not on the cheek. Not friendly. Not family. They didn't see me. I backed up the stairs, sat on the floor outside my room, and felt something sharp twist inside my chest. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was who betrayed me. Both of them. My father. My aunt. And suddenly, every past moment started rearranging itself in my head like puzzle pieces falling into place. Later that night, I confronted Denise. Not directly, I didn't have it in me yet. I just asked, "How long are you staying?" She smiled like she knew I knew something and said, "Just until your mom gets back. Family time, right?" I didn't sleep that night, and so began the unraveling. That moment sparked something in me. Call it obsession. Call it instinct. But I needed the truth. I needed to be sure. I didn't want to accuse anyone without proof. Because when the truth finally breaks, when you say it out loud, there's no going back. The next 7 days would change my life. Because when you spy on the people you love, you better be ready for what you find. I didn't confront my father right away. You'd think that after seeing your dad kiss your aunt, your mom's sister, your instinct would be to scream, rage, call him out. But that's not how it happened. Something inside me switched. Cold. Quiet. I stopped thinking like a son and started thinking like an investigator. The next morning I acted normal. Forced a smile. Ate cereal at the kitchen island while Denise scrolled through her phone like nothing happened. My father whistled while he made eggs. I wanted to grab the pan and throw it across the room. But instead I said, "Smells good, Dad," and kept chewing. Later that day, when he went to run errands, I did something I'd never done before. I went through his phone. I didn't expect to find anything. He wasn't stupid. He kept it locked. But he made one mistake. He used the same passcode for everything. I'd seen him unlock the garage keypad 1,000 times. 2385. I tried it on the phone. It opened. There weren't any messages from Denise. Nothing obvious. But the texts with DL were frequent. Strange, casual. Too casual. Lake Friday. Same time. Got your favorite. All time-stamped around the times I now realized she'd randomly stopped by. But what hit harder were the photos. They weren't explicit, not really. It's just the closeness of the father to the itty-bitty. Her legs draped over his lap, his hand on her thigh, a shot of her lipstick on a coffee mug, and the caption, "Better than your wife's roast." I felt sick, physically ill. This wasn't some drunken mistake. This was a long con. And here's the thing, my dad, he was getting bolder. He'd start snapping at Mom more often, belittling her, calling her scatterbrained, forgetful. Once, when she burned dinner, he slammed the plate into the sink and muttered, "No wonder Denise always cooks." She didn't catch it, but I did. One night, I overheard something through the vent. I wasn't eavesdropping at first. I was in my room, headphones off for once, and I heard his voice. Angry, low, controlled. "You need to stop texting so much when she's around," he hissed. "You're gonna blow this. She's not stupid." A pause. Then her voice. "Denise, relax. She doesn't suspect anything." Not he. She. They were talking about my mom. The next morning I woke up early. Before sunrise. I needed something. Concrete. Something I could hold in my hand and say, This is what you are." So I planted a recording app on his old work tablet. The one he left in the den when he thought no one cared anymore. I set it to record during the hours I knew he'd take his calls. That night, I listened to him say her name. "I want her gone," he said. "Eventually. But it has to be clean. Quiet. You get what I'm saying?" That was the moment I realized this wasn't just an affair. This was a takeover. It happened on a Tuesday. Funny how ordinary the day was. Bright sky, birds, a warm breeze. And yet that was the day my entire world split at the seams. I had a half day at school, some teacher in service thing. I didn't tell anyone. Not Mom. Not Dad. I took the bus home like always, then doubled back around the block, snuck in through the side door. Quiet. Barefoot. The house was dead silent. Until it wasn't. I heard the low hum of voices upstairs. A laugh. Her laugh. "Denise." I didn't move at first. I just stood there in the hallway with my pulse thumping in my ears. I wanted to believe it was just her visiting, just a normal drop-in. But then I heard something else. Not a voice. Not laughter. A loud sounds. That's when something inside me broke loose. I moved fast but silent, taking the stairs 2 at a time. At the top, I hesitated. The bedroom door was halfway open. I peeked through the crack and saw everything. My father was shirtless. Denise was wrapped around him like a snake. They weren't even trying to be discreet. My mother's bed, her sheets, her pillow still indented from the night before. That was where they chose to do it. Rage didn't come first. Numbness did. My mind refused to process what my eyes saw. Then my father saw me. He didn't jump. He didn't scramble or apologize or even look ashamed. No, he smirked. Like catching him was part of the plan. Like I was just some naive boy who needed to finally be shown how the world really works. "You shouldn't be home," he said, voice low and cold. Denise scrambled to cover herself, gasping, "Oh my God!" But he didn't let her speak. He barked, "Shut up." I stood frozen in the doorway, fists clenched. "Get out," he snapped, pointing at me like I was the intruder. "You're in Mom's bed," I said, barely able to form the words. He stepped toward me, not ashamed, not afraid, aggressive. I said, "Get the hell out before I make you." I took a step back. My legs were shaking. He wasn't bluffing. My dad had never hit me before, but in that moment I didn't know what he was capable of. I left, went outside, stood in the backyard for maybe an hour. Didn't cry, didn't scream, just stared at the fence like it was the only thing holding me back from something I couldn't take back. Eventually, Denise came outside. Alone. She looked disheveled. Makeup smeared. She reached out like she was going to touch my arm but stopped. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I said nothing. "I never meant for you to find out like that." "Like what?" I interrupted. "That you're having an affair with my father? That you're destroying my family?" Her face fell. "It's not like that. Don't lie." I heard him. The tablet. I recorded everything. That stopped her cold. She blinked. What? I know everything. She didn't try to deny it. That's when I realized she was more afraid of him than me. Or maybe afraid of what I'd do with the truth. I walked past her, toward the street. She called after me. Please, don't tell your mom. It'll ruin everything. I turned, looked her dead in the eye. It already has. When I told my mom, I didn't ease into it. There's no gentle way to break a truth that sharp. I sat her down at the kitchen table the same night, slid the tablet across the counter, and said, I need you to listen to something. She looked at me like I was overreacting. She still believed in the myth of our family, still trusted him. But she pressed play. It took less than a minute for the color to drain from her face. In the recording, my dad was laughing, joking with Denise, calling my mom dead weight. Said she wouldn't be a problem much longer. Then Denise's voice. You promised she wouldn't get hurt. His reply, cold, flat. Only if she plays along. My mother didn't cry. Not at first. She sat perfectly still. Then reached for her wine glass, her hand trembling so badly the stem snapped in two. The silence was unbearable. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. How long? I don't know, I said. Months at least. Maybe longer. She stood up, walked to the sink, turned on the tap like she was going to wash the glass shards down the drain. Instead, she screamed. Not words, just a raw, broken sound that split the air and shook something loose inside me. She sank to her knees right there on the kitchen floor, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. That night changed her. Forever. And him? He didn't flinch when she confronted him the next morning. He didn't even try to deny it. He said, You were never enough for me. Just like that, like he was spitting out spoiled food. Then he punched the wall, inches from her face. I stepped between them, ready to swing if I had to. For a second, he looked like he might take me on. But then he laughed. Don't play hero, kid, he said. You've got no idea what you're stepping into. But he was wrong. Because by then, I had every idea. I spent the next week preparing. Not for a fight, for something better. I started digging through documents, emails, bank statements. My mom gave me full access. She was numb, operating on autopilot. But I wasn't. I found transfers, secret credit cards, a burner phone in the garage he thought was hidden. I dug up every dirty little secret he'd buried. And then I found something else. Property records. He was buying a house. In Denise's name. A 3-bedroom condo outside town. Closed in 2 weeks. He was planning to leave. To start over with her. And leave us in the ashes. So I made a plan of my own. Step 1. Expose them. I made copies of everything. Flash drives. Screenshots. Printed documents. I mailed a set to my Aunt Denise's ex-husband, who, as it turns out, still had partial custody of her teenage daughter. You see, Denise had lied in court, claimed she had no romantic involvement that would affect the household. Oops. Step 2, Mom's lawyer. We got one of the best. Someone who didn't flinch when I said, We're not looking for settlement. We want to destroy him. Step 3, timing. The final blow had to come when he was most sure of himself, which meant waiting until he believed he'd won. I picked the day carefully. It was my father's birthday. He loved grand gestures, thought he was the center of gravity in any room. So when my mom suggested we still host a dinner for appearances, I knew it was the right time. He walked into the restaurant like he was already forgiven. Wore that smug grin like armor, hand resting on Denise's lower back. As if this new world he tried to build was already concrete. What he didn't know was that every person at that table, family, friends, even his older brother, had already seen the evidence. The screenshots, the emails, the wire transfers, all sent out earlier that morning with a simple subject line. The man behind the mask. We let him settle in. Let him toast his own glass of scotch. He was 3 sips in when my mother stood up. Calm, composed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just laid a manila envelope in front of him and said, You should read this. It's the last birthday you'll ever spend as my husband. Denise paled. He opened it, and slowly, piece by piece, the color drained from his face. Legal papers, custody filings, evidence reports, a personal statement from Denise's ex-husband, now reopening the custody case, a subpoena from the ethics committee at his workplace, and a short letter from me. You used to be the man I admired, but you don't deserve that anymore. I see now what you really are. A man who traded loyalty for lust. A man who thought he could build something real from betrayal. But here's the truth. You didn't just lose your wife. You lost your son. He didn't finish his drink. Didn't say a word. Just stood up and left. Denise chasing after him. The rest of us? We stayed. Ate dinner. Laughed. For the first time in months, it felt like our table again. But something happened after that. A week later, he showed up at the house. Not angry. Not defiant. Just hollow. Like something had been sucked out of him. He stood on the porch in the rain and asked for 5 minutes. Mom didn't speak. Just nodded and let me stay. His voice cracked. I lost everything, he said. But I never thought I'd lose you. I didn't let him off easy. I told him how long I'd known. How much I'd seen. How he chose Denise over all of us. He didn't argue. Just nodded. And then he said something that caught me off guard. You're right. You were the better man all along. That broke me, more than anything else could have. Because deep down I had wanted him to fight. To yell. To lie. Something. But he didn't. He looked like a man finally realizing the gravity of his own destruction. And even though I hated what he did, I still saw the man who used to carry me on his shoulders when I was 5. The man who taught me to ride a bike. The man who wasn't this. Not always. My mom stepped beside me. I could feel her shoulder brush mine. And for the first time, I stepped forward to speak for her. You can't undo it. But maybe you can stop making it worse. Sign the papers. Walk away clean. Don't drag her through court. He nodded, eyes glassy. I will, he whispered. And then, as he turned to go, he looked at my mom one last time. I'm sorry, he said. And for the first time, I believed him. It had been almost 6 months. No messages. No calls.
No sightings.
My father had vanished so completely, it was almost like he'd never existed. But trauma doesn't disappear. It lingers in dust, in the corners of empty chairs, in the way my mother sometimes looked at the driveway longer than she should. I got into Columbia. Full scholarship. When I told my mom, she cried harder than she did the day the papers were signed. He should be here, she whispered. I didn't say anything, but the truth curled up in the pit of my stomach like a tight fist. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. His handwriting. I heard you got in. Of course you did. You always had something better in you than I ever did. If you're willing, I'd like to see you before you go.
No expectations.
Just a coffee. Say what you need to say. Let me hear it, even if it's just to get it out. It was signed, that.
No apology. No excuses.
Just a crack in the wall. I stared at it for days. Then I said yes. We met at a grim little diner halfway between towns. He was already there when I arrived, older somehow, even though it had only been months. His hair was grayer, his face more drawn. But what shocked me most was his posture. For the first time in my life, my father looked small. He stood when I walked in, but I didn't hug him. Just nodded. Sat across the booth and waited. The silence stretched. Then he spoke. I'm not here to defend anything. I was an idiot. A selfish, reckless bastard. You don't have to tell me that. I know. I stared at him. Hard. You didn't just break her. You destroyed her. He nodded. I know. She still flinches when the garage door opens. His mouth trembled. I know. I wanted to scream. Wanted to spit every sharp word I'd rehearsed 100 times. But what came out was quieter. Meaner. You threw it all away for a woman who didn't even show up for you in the end. He winced. That hit deep. She used me, he said. But I let her. Because I wanted out. Not from your mom, from myself. From the version of me that had grown old and predictable and small. She made me feel big again. He looked me dead in the eye. But that's the thing about feeling big. Eventually, you realize it's just a costume. I sat back, absorbing his words. They didn't make it better, didn't make it right, but they were true. For once, I saw a man stripped of his pride. And maybe that was all I ever needed. You hurt the only people who ever truly loved you, I said. He nodded again, silent. After a moment, I reached into my coat pocket and slid a folded photo across the table. It was from years ago. The three of us, me, Mom, and Leah on the beach. Before the storm. Before Denise. Before everything cracked. She keeps this on the fridge, I said. Just thought you should see what you lost. His hand trembled as he picked it up. I don't expect anything, he whispered. But I'll keep it, if that's okay. I stood up, finished my coffee, looked down at the man who had once ruled over our home like a god. You were my father, I said. But you don't get to be my hero anymore. And I walked away. I didn't cry. Not until I got in the car. Not until the engine started and the diner disappeared in the rearview mirror. Not until the full weight of what it meant to outgrow the man who raised you finally hit me. Not grief. Not rage. Just release. We didn't speak again after that diner. He sent a card when I left for Colombia. No return address. Just 5 words, written in small, unsure handwriting. Be better than I was. I didn't write back. Not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say. Some things are complete in silence. College felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a cave. The first week was strange. No shadows trailing behind me, no glances toward the door to see if he'd come home angry, drunk, silent.
No tense dinners. No pretending.
My mother drove me up. We unpacked together. She cried when she saw the dorm room, the tiny bed, the window that overlooked a sliver of campus green. You made it, she said. We made it, I wanted to say, but I knew what she meant, because it wasn't just about getting into college. It was surviving the wreckage of a family we thought was whole. Before she left, I gave her something. A copy of that same photo I'd given my father, the one of us on the beach years ago. But this time I'd written something on the back. This time we rebuild with steel, not sand. Back home, she flourished. She went back to work full-time. Took up pottery, of all things. She adopted a dog. Started joining those book clubs she used to joke about. And most importantly, she smiled more. Not that brittle smile she used to wear around him. A real one. Full one. Leah transferred to a university closer to home. Said she wanted to be near Mom. But I knew the truth. She wanted to stand watch. She wanted to protect her too. That was our unspoken vow. To shield what he'd tried to ruin. To keep the pieces stitched together. And for once, we didn't do it out of obligation. We did it because we finally saw how fragile love could be. How quickly it can shatter if no one's holding it steady. Years passed. I graduated. Got a job in the city. Fell in love. Slowly, cautiously. I was careful. Too careful at first. Trust didn't come easy. But she was patient. She asked once, "What was your father like?" And I told her the truth. Complicated. I didn't say more. She didn't ask. Some ghosts don't need to be spoken aloud. You just learn to live around them. 3 years ago I got a call. He was in hospice. Cancer. It had spread. He kept it quiet, no surprise there. Denise was gone. She'd married someone else, moved out west. He had no one left. Just a nurse and a room with peeling paint. I went. Not because I owed him, but because closure doesn't always come with a letter or a slammed door. Sometimes it shows up in the final breaths of someone who once broke you. He looked smaller than I remembered. Faded. His eyes lit up when he saw me. Not with joy. Not with pride. Just relief. "You came," he whispered. I nodded. Sat beside him. He reached for my hand. I let him take it. "I never knew how to be a father," he said. "I only knew how to win." I didn't answer. He closed his eyes. "Tell her. Tell your mother I'm sorry." "No," I said softly. "You tell her. Yourself." He never got the chance. He died 3 days later. We didn't go to the funeral. There wasn't one. Instead, my mom lit a candle, placed the photo I gave her on the mantel, and that was it. Today, our house is different. Warmer. Stronger. The kind of place where people come for Thanksgiving and don't walk on eggshells. My mom's pottery is terrible, crooked bowls and lopsided mugs, but she laughs when she makes them. That's how I know she's okay. Leah's married now. Baby on the way. And me? I walk without watching shadows now. I used to think I wanted revenge. But the truth? What I wanted was for someone to finally choose us. The family. The home. The quiet good over the asterisk loud.